All right. So I'm your professor for this course. We've met up once live on Zoom to talk about, we went through the syllabus. So this is the first lecture that is like course content. And for the rest of the course, this is what you're going to be seeing in terms of lectures. We're not going to be meeting live on Zoom for 3 hours or whatever they want us to do. That's, to me, crazy. So I'm going to carve these up into little bite-sized lectures. There's going to be one video for each reading, basically, and you're going to have 4 readings a week. Each video be like 20, 30 minutes, I'm thinking. Um, and so hopefully you can just sort of like sit down, watch one of these after or before reading the article and sort of absorb that in little bite-sized chunks, I think, rather than try to concentrate for like 3 hours feels to me a little while. So this first lecture actually does not accompany a reading. Every other one will have a reading that goes with it. But for this lecture, I just wanted to sort of review some stuff that you probably covered in Phil 27, but I can't guarantee because I didn't teach whatever Phil 27 course you took. But it's just a review of general ethical theories. So this, Phil 28, is a course in applied ethics. So what that means is if you've taken another ethics course, which I believe you should have taken Phil 27, you probably spent a lot of time talking about general theories of right and wrong, right? In this course, we're going to focus on particular issues and see whether particular things are right or wrong. So abortion, is that right or wrong? Affirmative action, is that right or wrong? Geoengineering, cosmetic neurology, right? But the general topics, right, is a 5-week course. I want to survey 5 general areas of applied ethics, and they're going to be bioethics, social ethics, environmental ethics, neuroethics, and the ethics of artificial intelligence. I'm particularly interested in those latter 2. Philosophy of mind is my main area, but I do want to have a broad variety of stuff so you can find something that's interesting to you that you can write your paper on. So the idea for this lecture is let's review. I imagine you're probably a little rusty on your ethical theories, on your meta ethics, as we call it. That's fine, right? So this will kind of help you reintroduce all those various theories to you because they will get mentioned in the readings later, and it'll be helpful to you if you know what they're talking about when they mention utilitarianism or care ethics or something like that in one of these papers. Uh, so I'm also going to review the basic concept of normativity, and yeah, utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics, care ethics. That's what I'm going to cover in this lecture. There's more that we could talk about, but those are the ones that you'll see in the later readings. And this car may be your mind, a little rusty. It's okay. All right, first, let's talk about normativity. So this course is completely in the realm of normativity, and you may wonder what that is. So probably the majority of the courses you've taken in your life teach you about what is the universe like, right? So in the sciences, you'll study various laws that govern the universe, what sort of subatomic particles there are, right? This is a photo of an electron. Various biological systems and how they work, nations, if you're studying economics or politics, right? If you're in engineering, you might want to take those laws that we discover in those other courses and in those other disciplines and apply them, see what can be done, right, with our knowledge of those laws. And even in stuff like mathematics, which seems so abstract, is the study of what exists, right? It's a study of what exists in the abstract world of numbers. We want to find is there a greatest prime, right? What are the patterns that we find, right, in this realm? So this is all called descriptive, right? This is all questions about what is, basically. And what we want to do in all of these different various disciplines at our university is we want to figure out what are all the true statements about the universe, right? Force equals mass times acceleration is one of them, right? The acceleration of gravity is 9.81 meters per second squared. We want to know it all, right? There is no greatest prime. It is possible to send humans to the moon and have them survive. So these are just a few of the descriptive statements that you learn. But in this course, we're still trying to determine the set of true statements about the world, but not about what exists, but what should be, right? So once we know that we can remove a fetus from a woman's uterus without harming the woman, right? Once we know that we can cool the Earth's atmosphere by injecting sulfides into the atmosphere, once we know that we can implant an electrode in a person's brain that predicts and prevents seizures, and this is all stuff we're going to talk about in this course, we know that we can do it. Before we actually do any of this stuff, it's a good idea to ask if we should, right? In some cases, we should even ask whether we should even try to know certain things, right? So this is the realm of normativity. What should happen? What should we do? It's like the other half of life, at least, right? Knowing what there is and then knowing what to do about it. There are two kinds of normativity, right? So one kind is like, what should I do if I want a particular end, right? So that is a normative statement, right? So if I want to say, oh, it's whatever, it's Tuesday at 3 p.m. and I say, oh, how can I get to class? What's the quickest way to get to class? How can I get to class quickly? And you might say, oh, take Genesee, right? So that's a should statement, right? You should take Genesee, but it's constrained to a very particular end, right? And this is what we call instrumental statements, instrumental sort of normativity. It doesn't have a lot of ethical weight. It's not so much what we're going to be concerned with in this course. What we want is sort of the more ultimate should statements, right? What should I do in the most general sense? That is the sort of normative statement that we cover in ethics. So here I'm going to survey 4 ethical theories. There's more. These are some of the bigger ones, I think. Right? So in all of these, attempt to answer in the most general sense, what should I do, right? They attempt to give you an answer in every case, right? They're going to give you, they're different, right? So which one is right? Well, there's at least 4 of them. So that's obviously a matter of contention. It's something that we're still studying and arguing about in ethics. Luckily for us, in the applied cases that we're going to look at, they often agree with each other, right, on specific cases, right? Many of the 10 commandments, right, are things that sort of everyone agrees on. Yeah, don't steal, don't kill people for no reason, right? Don't hurt people for no reason. So in case you were wondering, should I kick Professor Nate randomly in the crotch if I ever see him in person? Rest assured, every great ethicist in the history of ethics says, no, you should not, right? So good, we've agreed on one thing. So first ethical theory I'll talk about today, utilitarianism. So this is John Stuart Mill here, this photo, right? He's around, kicking around in the 1800s. So to understand utilitarianism, right, their answer to what is the ultimate should, let's go back to our example of how do I get to campus quickly, right? And I tell you, oh, you should take Genesee. But you may want to ask sort of a further question, which is like, should I even get to campus quickly? Is that something I should do? Because if that's not something I should do, then I shouldn't take Genesee. And the answer may be yes, right? If you want to make it to your final on time, say. But then you might ask, say, should I make it to my final on time? Well, yeah, if you want to graduate and get a good GPA, then yes, you should. Okay, but should I graduate and get a good GPA? You might say, yes, if you want to get a good job, you should do that. Of course, I can say, well, should I get a good job? And you might say, yes, you should, because you need to make enough money to pay for food and for housing and stuff like that. Well, should I pay for food and housing? And you say, yes, you should, because otherwise you will live on the street. And I say, should I live on the street or not? Maybe I should live on the street. And you should say, no, you'll be hungry, right? Your stomach will hurt. You'll be cold. You'll be tired. You're out there exposed. You could be attacked, and being attacked hurts. Notice that this is starting to finally bottom out, right? We got a long series of should statements, right, that are sort of instrumental. Utilitarians say any version of that, whether it's getting to campus on time, or should I should I loan money to my friend, or should I eat a burrito for lunch? All these sort of instrumental contingent should statements are all going to bottom out in questions of pleasure and pain. They say, ultimately, the good in the world that you should pursue is pleasure, not just for yourself, but for everybody, right? The most pleasure possible. And the bad in the world is pain. So the ultimate end of everything, when you ask what should I do, is maximize pleasure, minimize pain for the whole world. This slide is basically what I just said, right? So they kind of like locate it right into the pleasure centers of the brain, right? This is where good and evil begin and end, ultimately, right? You get interesting consequences for that, though, right? It captures a lot of how we typically think about morality, but not all of it. So, for instance, right, should I steal a shirt from H&M? On the Ten Commandments, it says stealing is wrong, right? Thou shalt not steal. But to the utilitarian, right, well, that's going to depend on a few things. So the utilitarian is a very specific sort. There's all kinds of variations within this world, right? Utilitarianism is the most popular. So what it is hedonistic act consequentialism. What that means is, by the act part, the sorts of things that we judge as right and wrong are your actions, right? It's not your character that's right or wrong, right? It's not your intentions that are right or wrong. It's what do you do, right? And how do we determine whether what you do is right or wrong? By the consequences, right? That makes it consequentialist. And what sort of consequences do we care about? Pleasure and pain. That's the hedonist part. So hedonistic act consequentialism. So this is how the utilitarians determine right and wrong. Should I steal the shirt? Well, let's see. It'll make me happy to have a nice new shirt. It might make my friends happy to see me, right, looking good in the nice new shirt. It will make probably the company unhappy. They will lose a tiny bit of profit. It's a pretty large company. Probably won't hurt them that much. But who knows? You have to add it up, right? Maybe they're on the verge of bankruptcy. Maybe they'll end up having to fire some employees or lay them off, or maybe they'll lose a shift, right? And there will be all sorts of painful consequences for them. But that's the idea. You add up the total pleasure, total pain for the whole world, and if it falls in if the pleasure column is higher, do it. If the pain column is higher, don't do it. And so there are fewer hard and fast rules. Don't ever steal. Depends. So we'll hear a lot about consequentialism in this course, right? Which again is sort of a broader category than utilitarianism. All utilitarists are consequentialists, but there's other kinds of consequentialists. So maybe you don't think that pleasure and pain is the consequence that we care about. Maybe you think it's something else. Preference satisfaction is a popular one. Maybe you could be a consequentialist, but not think that the actions are the things that we focus on for right and wrong. Maybe you want to focus on more general rules, right? You'd be a rule consequentialist. In that case, rules like don't steal, right? If that's going to overall make for the most pleasure and the least pain in society, if people follow that rule, then stealing is going to be wrong, regardless of maybe in one particular instance, right? It'll cause more pleasure. Rule consequentialists will focus on the general rule. In general, consequentialism, utilitarianism, pretty appealing. I think it captures a lot of our sort of default sense of morality, and I think everyone acts like a utilitarian sometimes. But there are big problems with consequentialism. Here's one example. So a couple years ago, I cut myself. I was working with a knife, doing a window screen, and I slipped, cut my hand pretty bad. So I had to go to the emergency room. I was in Hollywood, so I went to the Kaiser over in Hollywood. Now, imagine that it just so happened that when I got there were 5 different patients there, and all of them in desperate need of a different organ to survive. One needs a heart, right, or they're going to die. One needs a kidney, or they're going to die, and so on, right? Suppose there's a brilliant new utilitarian surgeon working there. He sees me come in relatively healthy, just a cut on my hand, lots of nice, healthy, good organs, and he thinks, if I kill this one guy, harvest his 5 organs, I could save 5 lives. Think of all the pleasure I would create for them and their families, right? And, sure, I'm going to cause some pain for Nate and his family, but, it'll be 1/5, right? The pain is the pleasure. This is a no-brainer, right? I got to sacrifice Nate and take his organs. That would have to be the utilitarian view, right? That seems like a bummer, right? So a general problem that comes up with utilitarianism is like, should we always be subject to the tyranny of the majority, right? Whatever makes the most people happy is what everybody has to do. Well, that seems like a drag if if your tastes are different or if you're just in a minority, right? And different versions of consequentialism, like a rule consequentialism, could probably institute a rule that says hospitals shouldn't kill people, for no reason or to harvest their organs or whatever. And that might work out, right? So, but you do have to sort of jimmy a little bit with utilitarianism, right, to make it fit all the cases. It comes up with some pretty wild answers sometimes. All right, so if you don't like utilitarianism or you don't like it all the time, another big one is deontology. For ethical theories, this is Kant over here. He was kicking around more in the 1700s, I think. So if you thought it was weird, I said, well, if you add it up, maybe it's good, and the right thing I should always do is steal a shirt from H&M when I walk in there, because they're big corporations, not going to really hurt them very much. Going to cause me and my friends a lot of pleasure, right? So utilitarianism says always steal a shirt when you can get away with it, or something like that. And that might strike you as odd, right? And that might be because there's also an important strain of deontology in our general sort of default morality. So this is Immanuel Kant. So he doesn't think that actions are the things that are right and wrong, and he doesn't think that consequences or pleasure have anything to do with morality. He says the only truly good thing is a good will, right? What he means by that basically is that your intentions are what matter, right? And I think this is an important component of how we think about morality. So if I give money to charity, right, but it just happens to get stolen by an evil genius who uses the money to whatever nuke Texas or something, right? Well, terrible consequences, right, for my donating to charity. But Kant would say that's not your fault. You're not to blame, right? Your intentions were good, and vice versa, right? So if I mean to punch somebody in the face, but what I end up doing actually is like I miss and I punch a rock that was about to land on them and kill them, and I save their life, right? Well, Kant says even though the consequences were good, you meant to hurt them, so you actually did something bad, right? And I think that matches with our intuitions a lot. So when you hear about Kant, you will probably hear about the categorical imperative. And this was his sort of like boiling down of his general ethical view. He has a couple different formulations of it, but here's one. He says, act only according to rules that you would want to be like universal rules. So like anytime you want to do something, you think, sort of what rule am I following? And would I want everyone to follow that same rule? And if you say yes, then go ahead and do it. And if you don't, if you think, no, I wouldn't want everyone to follow that rule, or more specifically, what Kant is saying, like if following that rule would result in some kind of contradiction, then you don't do it, right? He thinks that morality is somehow grounded in rationality, right? And that these bad rules, if you actually followed them and made them universal, they would sort of break down into incoherence in some way. It's very complicated. Kant scholarship there's a lot on that, but here's one example that seems to work for that view, right? Say you promise to take your friend to the airport, and then the day comes and you want to just make up some excuse because you don't want to do it, right? So you ask yourself, well, what rule would I be following if I did that? And it might be something like, it's okay to break your promises if you really just don't feel like keeping them, right? Well, could I will that to be a universal rule, right, where everyone followed that rule? And it seems like if everyone followed that rule, then it would end up not even being such a thing as a promise, right? Because if every promise everyone made could always be broken, then it's not a promise. So it seems to somehow break down into incoherence, right? If you try to universalize that rule. So that's the general idea. If you don't totally get that, it's a tricky thing. Not anyone totally gets it, to be honest. But there's something about it, right? There's something golden rule-y about it, right? It's kind of like the golden rule. Do unto others as you have them do unto you. Not exactly, but it's in the neighborhood. Here is the second formulation of that same principle, the categorical imperative. Here Kant says, never treat another person as a mere means to your ends. Always treat people as ends in themselves. This is definitely a bit like the golden rule, right? It's saying treat people not just as sort of tools for your use, but treat them as you would want to be treated, right? So you wouldn't break a promise just because it's inconvenient, because right, that would be just using that person as a tool for your own convenience. You wouldn't steal from a business owner either, even if they're rich, right? You're just using them. They have their own goals and plans, and they've been working real hard maybe to make a bunch of money if that's their thing. Um, so you can't just use them as a means to your ends to have a shirt, right? And you certainly wouldn't harvest someone's organs to save 5 people. Right? You would want to treat them with a certain measure of dignity. But there's problems with deontology as well, right? In particular, the formulation of the categorical imperative seems to have some weird consequences. It seems to rule out, if you said, like, I want to play tennis on Wednesday, right? And you think, oh, okay, well, because remember, these are supposed to be totally general ethical principles, right? They're supposed to be able to determine anything you want to do, right? You can consult these principles. So, should I play tennis on Wednesday? Well, would I make that a universal rule, right? To play tennis on Wednesday? Well, then you'd have a court that looks like this, right? So it seems like in some way that would be a problem, right? So there's weirdness with that categorical imperative, and even beyond that little logical weirdness or whatever, that particular formulation of the categorical imperative, um, just the general idea that there's moral rules that can't be broken does rub up against our intuitions at some points, right? So, right, you imagine it's World War II, you're in Germany, you're one of the good people there trying to sort of hide Jews from the Nazis who want to take them away and send them to concentration camps, right? And you've got some in your attic, right? And then the Nazis come to the door, bang, bang, bang. Do you have any Jews in your home? Um, well, Kant would have to say, don't lie, right? You never lie. Rules can never be broken. And so, can that be right? That you'd have to tell the Nazis, yes, I do have some Jews in my home, and they come and take them away. That feels wrong to us, right? There has to be a little wiggle room there, and Kant doesn't really give us any wiggle room. Okay, third ethical theory, virtue ethics. This is associated with Aristotle. That's Aristotle there. So the way I tend to think about it is, utilitarians are saying, what's good or bad? Actions, right? Deontologists like Kant, what's good or bad? Intentions, right? And virtue ethics says, what's good or bad? People, right? So what is the right thing to do? What should I do right now? What would a good person do? What would a virtuous person do? That's what you should do. Well, what's a virtuous person? Well, it's someone who has the virtues, right? Exhibits all the various virtues. Well, what are the virtues? Well, for Aristotle, this is associated with the golden mean. I don't know if you are familiar with this concept, right? So the right path is sort of in between the two extremes. So every sort of character trait that might be a virtue exists on a continuum, right? And either end is going to be bad. So you've got cowardice on one hand and foolhardiness on the other, and in the middle you got courage, right? So you don't want to just run into battle without any weapons, right? Just screaming. That's not courage. That's foolishness. But you don't want to run away from battle and hide. That's cowardice. So courage is in between. That's the virtue. And even for Aristotle, knowledge is sort of in between ignorance and what he calls cunning, right? Being too clever, I guess. So that's the idea for Aristotle. But in general, this approach to ethics, I think, makes some intuitive sense, right? We're not always sort of doing the utilitarian math, how much pleasure is created, how much pain. And we're not always following rules, right, to the T and never breaking them. What we do is we copy people that we admire, right? Either a parent or someone else, right? Right? You think, man, I want to be like them. I want to exhibit all the virtues they exhibit, and you copy them, and that's how you learn to be good and do good. All right, and the last of the four ethical theories is care ethics. So this is associated with Carol Gilligan, and she's sort of responding to a strain in psychology, which is associated with Kohlberg, right? So utilitarianism and deontology sort of privilege these abstract principles, right? The utilitarian calculus, right? Adding up the pleasure and pain, or the categorical imperative, right? These general, unbreakable ethical principles, right? And sort of thinking in that vein, Kohlberg, who was a psychologist, was studying moral development in children, right? And he thought, well, moral development goes towards the more and more abstract, towards these more general principles. And so he'd follow around these little boys and girls, and he noticed, the boys, right, they are citing these more general principles, right? You ask them, hey, is it okay to steal bread to feed your family? And the boys say no, or even if they say yes, they maybe cite some sort of like utilitarian principle, right? And you notice the girls just kind of refused to play the game, right? They said, no, there's got to be some way. Can't you ask the store owner and say, hey, I'm starving. Can I have a little bread? I'm sure he'll give you some. Right? They just wouldn't sort of like stick to these general principles. And now Kohlberg thought that that meant the girls were less developed. But Carol Gilligan said, no, the girls are onto something here, right? They're onto the importance of personal relationships when it comes to ethics. And we call this care ethics, right? Again, sort of ethics is sort of based in there are relationships between humans and caring for each other, right? And that's what it is to be ethical, to care for other people, something like that, right? And that makes sense of some of our intuitions, right? There's all these sort of utilitarian sort of situations they'll put you in to test your intuitions, right? And if they asked you, should you kill your mom to save 5 other strangers? Even if the math works out, like, in a sense, no, I'm not going to kill my mom, right? I would never do that, right? And I think that reflects the essential care and the essence of sort of relationships with other people that is also important to ethics that Carol Gilligan taps into. All right, so wrapping up, there's other ethical theories, social contract theory, divine command theory, but the 4 I covered, they're going to come up in the readings. That's why I talked about them now. You will see them later, right? So it's worth reviewing them. So we're going to cover some specific questions. Again, is abortion morally permissible? Is it morally permissible to have children at all? Is affirmative action just, right? What should we do about artificial intelligence? And you'll find that sort of a variety of these big picture theories are going to be applied to these questions. You might find it useful when you're writing your papers to frame it in terms of one or more of these theories. One good way to argue for a particular view is to say, look, all 4 of these theories all give the same answer on this particular view I'm arguing for, right? And I think they all sort of capture part of our sort of default moral intuitions. Maybe one is totally correct, right? Or maybe they're all correct in their own ways. This is sort of called pluralism, right? And again, we're not going to answer this question as to which one is right, but I just want to give you the vocabulary, the framework, right? That's sort of the background to talk about some of these specific issues. So that's it on this, and I will see you in the next video.